In 1974, a 9-year-old girl captured the hearts of millions of Americans. For 9 consecutive seasons, she was the face of innocence, resilience, the perfect family. Her image graced magazines, lunchboxes, dolls. Children wanted to be her. Parents trusted her. She was the America everyone wanted to believe existed. But there's a brutal price few ever see. Behind that iconic smile, those perfectly arranged braids, a little girl was disappearing. While the country loved her, she was being emptied out. Adopted at just 1 day old, orphaned at 11, turned into a commodity before she even understood what it meant to be a child. And when the cameras stopped rolling? When America moved on to the next icon? The fall was so devastating that not even decades of fame could protect her. Public bankruptcy, addiction that nearly killed her, debts exceeding $360,000, multiple spinal surgeries, the money that should have been hers, years of relentless work, simply vanished. How did America's most beloved TV girl end up completely destroyed? What happens when you sacrifice your entire childhood to make the world happy, but nobody asks if you're happy? Why did those who should have protected her abandon her again and again? And is it even possible to rebuild yourself when everything you were was stolen from you? Before we answer, we need to go back to the beginning. Because Melissa Gilbert's story didn't start on a lit stage. It started in a hospital nursery, with a 1-day-old baby being handed over to strangers. And that initial abandonment would shape every moment of pain that came after. From the moment Melissa opened her eyes, she was living someone else's script. Paul and Barbara Gilbert were not her biological parents, though for years they were the only family she knew. Her adopted father, Paul, was a warm, funny man whose career in comedy brought laughter to others but struggled to sustain his own household. Her mother, Barbara, was elegant and ambitious, a former dancer who understood the currency of beauty and performance in Hollywood. But the Gilbert home was not the safe haven it appeared to be. Paul and Barbara's marriage was crumbling under financial strain and personal differences. By the time Melissa was still a toddler, they divorced. At only 2 years old, she had already experienced her first profound loss, the disappearance of her father from daily life. Paul tried to remain present, visiting when he could, bringing gifts and laughter. But in 1976, when Melissa was just 11 years old, he died suddenly of a stroke. The loss was catastrophic. The man who had chosen her, who had legally made her his daughter, was gone before she even understood what it meant to grieve. Years later, Melissa would confess with raw honesty, "Losing my dad shattered something in me that never fully healed. He was my anchor, and suddenly I was adrift." But there was another wound, quieter and more insidious. She had always known she was adopted. Her parents told her early, framing it as being chosen and special. But as she grew older, the absence of her biological parents became a haunting question mark. Who were they? Why didn't they want her? Was there something wrong with her that made them give her away? These questions gnawed at her in the silence between auditions and applause. The need to be wanted, to prove she was worthy of love, became the invisible engine driving everything she did. Barbara, now a single mother, saw opportunity in her daughter's expressive face and natural charisma. Hollywood was a brutal industry, but it was also a place where a pretty, talented child could become a gold mine. By the time Melissa was 5 years old, she was already auditioning for commercials. Bright lights, cameras, directors barking instructions, the pressure to smile on cue, to cry on command, to be whatever adults needed her to be. She booked her first commercial at 6, then another. And another. Guest spots on television shows followed. The Dean Martin Show, Emergency, Gunsmoke. Each role was small, but each one taught Melissa a devastating lesson. Love and approval were conditional. They came when you performed well. They vanished when you didn't. Her childhood evaporated into 12-hour days on sets, memorizing lines instead of multiplication tables, rehearsing emotions instead of playing with dolls. While other children scraped knees on playgrounds, Melissa was perfecting her crying face for the camera. "I never had a real childhood," she would later admit. "I was always working, always performing, always being someone else." Then came 1974, the audition that would change everything. NBC was casting a new family drama based on Laura Ingalls Wilder's beloved books, Little House on the Prairie. They needed a girl to play Laura Ingalls, the spirited, adventurous middle daughter of a pioneer family. Hundreds of girls auditioned. Melissa, only 9 years old, walked into that room carrying the weight of needing to be chosen again. And she was. When Michael Landon, the show's star and producer, told her she had the part, Melissa felt a rush of validation so powerful it nearly knocked her breathless. Finally, she was wanted. Finally, she was enough. But what she didn't realize, couldn't possibly understand at 9 years old, was that she had just signed away the rest of her childhood. Little House on the Prairie premiered on September 11, 1974, and became an instant sensation. Families across America gathered around their television sets every week to watch the Ingalls family navigate hardship with grace, love, and moral clarity. And at the center of it all was Melissa Gilbert, the girl with the bright eyes and contagious smile, playing Laura Ingalls with such authenticity that millions believed she was Laura. The show's success was staggering. Top 10 ratings, Emmy nominations, Melissa's face on magazine covers, lunchboxes, dolls. Fan mail poured in by the thousands. Strangers stopped her on the street, wanting hugs, autographs, photographs. She was beloved, adored, idolized. But on set, the reality was far less magical. Days started before dawn and stretched past dusk, scripts to memorize, marks to hit, emotions to summon on command. Michael Landon, brilliant and driven, demanded perfection. He could be warm and fatherly one moment, cold and exacting the next. For Melissa, desperate to please the father figure she had lost, his approval became oxygen. "I would have done anything to make Michael proud," she confessed years later. "I needed him to see me, to validate me. I was a little girl starving for a father's love, and I poured all of that hunger into my work." The pressure was relentless. Between takes, tutors drilled her in schoolwork to meet legal education requirements. During lunch breaks, she studied lines. Evenings were consumed by fittings, rehearsals, promotional appearances. Weekends offered no rest, just more scripts, more preparation, more performance. And through it all, Melissa smiled. She gave interviews praising the show, gushing about how much fun it was, insisting she loved every minute. Because that's what America's sweetheart was supposed to say. That's what the adopted girl who needed to prove she was worthy of being chosen had learned to do. But inside, something was fracturing. The lines between Melissa Gilbert and Laura Ingalls were blurring. When cameras stopped rolling, she didn't know who she was supposed to be. Was she the brave pioneer girl? The obedient actress? The abandoned baby nobody wanted? The star everyone adored? By the time she turned 13, Melissa had spent nearly half her life pretending to be someone else. She had mastered the art of performance, but had never been taught how to simply be a child. School dances, sleepovers, lazy summer afternoons, all the ordinary moments that build identity were replaced with scripts, schedules, and the suffocating need to stay perfect. Because perfection was the only thing keeping her safe. Perfection kept the show running. Perfection kept America loving her. Perfection kept her from being abandoned again. What Melissa didn't know, couldn't possibly see at 13, was that the foundation she was building her entire identity on was already beginning to crack. And when it finally collapsed, the fall would be devastating. By the late 1970s, Little House on the Prairie was not just a television show. It was a cultural phenomenon. Melissa Gilbert, barely into her teens, was one of the most recognizable faces in America. Her portrayal of Laura Ingalls had earned her critical acclaim, a Golden Globe nomination, and the unconditional love of millions of viewers who saw her as the embodiment of wholesome American values. But the wholesome image America cherished was becoming a prison. Behind the scenes, Melissa was navigating the treacherous waters of adolescence under the most unforgiving spotlight imaginable. Every pimple was photographed, every pound scrutinized, every awkward phase dissected in tabloids. She was expected to remain forever the innocent prairie girl, even as her body and mind were changing in ways she couldn't control. On set, the pressure intensified. As the show progressed, storylines became heavier. Laura Ingalls faced tragedy, loss, moral dilemmas. Melissa had to summon tears for a miscarriage storyline when she had never even kissed a boy. She had to portray grief over losing a baby when she was still playing with dolls in her trailer between takes. The emotional toll of constantly mining trauma for performance began to erode something essential inside her. "I was living in two worlds," Melissa later recalled. "On camera, I was this strong, brave pioneer girl. Off camera, I was a confused, insecure teenager who didn't know who she was supposed to be." The confusion deepened when romance entered her life, not in the safe, scripted way of television, but in the messy, inappropriate reality of a Hollywood set. At 15, Melissa developed an intense crush on one of the crew members, a man significantly older than her. The relationship, inappropriate by any measure, became her first experience with what she thought was love. She was too young to understand the power dynamics at play, too starved for affection to recognize manipulation. When the relationship inevitably ended, it left her shattered, convinced that even when someone seemed to choose her, it was never for long. The pattern of abandonment, first her biological parents, then her adopted father's death, now this, was reinforcing a toxic belief. She was not enough to keep. Around the same time, Melissa had her first drink. It was innocent enough. Champagne at a cast party, a small glass pressed into her hand by adults who thought it was harmless. But for Melissa, that first sip was a revelation. The alcohol dulled the constant anxiety, quieted the voice that whispered she wasn't good enough, softened the sharp edges of loneliness. I remember thinking, "This is it. This is what I've been missing," she confessed decades later. "It made me feel calm, confident, like I could finally breathe." Cruelty, what started as occasional drinks at parties, escalated slowly, insidiously. A glass of wine to relax after a grueling day of filming. A shot of vodka to numb the sting of a tabloid headline. By her late teens, drinking had become her primary coping mechanism, a secret she guarded as carefully as any Hollywood scandal. But alcohol wasn't the only escape. As Little House on the Prairie limped toward its final seasons in the early 1980s, the cast and crew could feel the end approaching. Ratings were slipping, storylines were becoming increasingly outlandish, desperate attempts to recapture the magic of earlier seasons. The wholesome family drama was being replaced with sensationalized plots, explosions, kidnappings, bizarre twists that felt nothing like the simple stories that had made the show beloved. For Melissa, the decline of the show felt like a personal failure. If the show died, what would happen to her? Who was Melissa Gilbert without Laura Ingalls? The thought terrified her. She had spent nearly a decade being Laura. And now the one thing that had defined her, validated her, proved she was worthy of being chosen, was ending. The final episode of Little House on the Prairie aired in 1983. Melissa was 19 years old. For most teenagers, 19 is the threshold of adulthood, full of possibilities and fresh starts. For Melissa, it was the edge of a cliff. The show that had made her a star, that had consumed her childhood and adolescence, was over. The steady paycheck, the structured days, the constant validation of being wanted, needed, adored, all of it vanished almost overnight. Suddenly, she was just another former child star in a town that chewed up and spat out yesterday's darlings without a second thought. She tried to transition to adult roles, auditioning for films and television shows, desperate to prove she was more than just Laura Ingalls. But casting directors saw only the braids and the Prairie dress. They couldn't see Melissa because Melissa herself didn't know who that was. Rejections piled up. Callbacks led nowhere. Auditions that once felt like formalities now felt like humiliations. The industry that had once worshipped her was now indifferent. And indifference, Melissa discovered, hurt far more than hatred. Her mother, Barbara, had managed her career and finances throughout her childhood. Melissa assumed she was financially secure. She had worked consistently for 9 years on one of the most successful shows on television. Surely there was money saved, investments made, a safety net to catch her as she figured out what came next. But when Melissa finally looked at her finances, the truth was devastating. Most of the money she had earned was gone. Mismanaged, spent, or simply unaccounted for. Years of work, of sacrificed childhood, of relentless performance had left her with almost nothing. The betrayal cut deep. Not just the financial loss, but the realization that even the people who were supposed to protect her, her own mother, had failed her. Once again, she had been abandoned. Once again, she wasn't enough to be chosen, to be cherished, to be protected. At 20, Melissa Gilbert was unmoored. No show, no career, no money, no identity. Just a crushing sense of emptiness and the growing realization that the only thing that quieted the screaming in her head was the bottle. She began drinking more heavily. Not publicly, she was still America's sweetheart, still expected to maintain the illusion, but privately, desperately. Mornings started with mimosas to take the edge off anxiety. Afternoons blurred into evenings with wine. Nights ended with vodka straight from the bottle, drinking until she could finally sleep without the nightmares of being forgotten. I was drowning, she admitted years later, and I didn't know how to ask for help because I had spent my entire life pretending everything was perfect. The little girl who had once been America's beacon of hope was now a young woman lost in the darkness, searching for something, anything, to fill the void that fame had carved into her soul. And the worst part? The fall had only just begun. The cracks that started in childhood were now fractures, and soon they would become a chasm that nearly swallowed her whole. In the wreckage of her post-Prairie years, Melissa Gilbert did what so many lost souls do. She searched for salvation in the arms of someone else. If she couldn't find identity in her career, perhaps she could find it in love. Perhaps being chosen by a man could fill the void that fame had left behind. In 1988, at 24 years old, Melissa married Bo Brinkman, an actor she had met during an audition. The relationship moved fast, fueled more by desperation than genuine connection. Bo was charming, attentive, and most importantly, he wanted her. For Melissa, that was enough. "I thought marriage would fix me," she confessed years later. "I thought if someone loved me enough, I wouldn't feel so empty anymore." But marriage didn't fix anything. Instead, it magnified everything broken inside her. Bo had his own struggles, his own demons. Two wounded people clinging to each other didn't create healing. It created chaos. Arguments erupted over money, over career jealousy, over the bottles of wine Melissa tried to hide but couldn't. In 1989, Melissa gave birth to their son, Dakota. For a brief, shining moment, motherhood felt like redemption. Holding her baby boy, she thought, "Finally, someone who will always choose me, someone who will never leave." But the reality of motherhood collided brutally with her unresolved trauma. She loved Dakota fiercely, desperately, but she had no idea how to be a mother because she had never truly been allowed to be a child. She was performing motherhood the way she had performed everything else, trying to be perfect, terrified of failure, drowning in anxiety. And when the anxiety became unbearable, she drank. Not around Dakota, never where he could see, but in the bathroom, in the car, in stolen moments when she could escape the suffocating pressure of trying to be enough. The marriage crumbled. By 1992, Melissa and Bo divorced. She was 28 years old, a single mother, with a career that had stalled completely, and a bank account that was hemorrhaging money faster than she could comprehend. Auditions led nowhere. The few roles she booked were forgettable, made-for-TV movies that came and went without notice. Hollywood had moved on. The Prairie Girl was yesterday's news, and there were thousands of younger, fresher faces eager to take her place. Financial desperation forced her to make choices that once would have seemed unthinkable. She took any job offered, no matter how small, no matter how demeaning. Dinner theater productions in towns that didn't know her name. Voice-over work for commercials. Guest spots on struggling sitcoms. Each job a reminder of how far she had fallen. But the worst humiliation was still coming. In 1995, Melissa married again. This time to Bruce Boxleitner, an established actor with a steady career. On paper, it seemed like a smart choice, a stable partnership that could provide the security she desperately needed. Bruce had 2 sons from a previous marriage. Melissa brought Dakota. They tried to blend their families, to build something resembling normalcy. For a while, it almost worked. Melissa threw herself into being a wife and stepmother, attending school functions, cooking dinners, playing the role of domestic goddess. She even managed to book a recurring role on Boxleitner's show, Babylon 5, a small victory that felt like progress. In 2001, they had a son together, Michael. Once again, Melissa felt the rush of hope that comes with new life, another chance to get it right, to be the mother she never had, to create the family stability she had always craved. But the cracks were already too deep. Bruce's career was thriving while hers continued to sputter. The resentment festered quietly. She smiled for family photos while screaming inside, trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt like suffocation. And through it all, she kept drinking. More carefully now, more strategically, she became an expert at hiding it. Mouthwash to mask the smell. vodka in water bottles, trips to different liquor stores so no one would notice how often she was buying. "I was a functioning alcoholic," she later admitted. "I could get through the day, take care of my kids, show up when I needed to. But inside, I was dying." The drinking accelerated after a devastating discovery in the mid-2000s. Melissa finally decided to confront her financial situation head-on. She hired an accountant to review her earnings from Little House on the Prairie, expecting to find at least some residual income, some safety net from those years of relentless work. What she found instead was financial devastation beyond comprehension. Residuals that should have been hers had been mismanaged. Money that should have been protected was gone. Investments that should have secured her future were non-existent. The accountant's verdict was brutal. She was essentially broke, with debts mounting and no clear path to solvency. The betrayal was crushing. She had sacrificed her entire childhood for that show. She had given everything, performed through exhaustion and grief and confusion, believing that at least she was building something secure. But there was nothing. She had been abandoned again, this time by the very industry that had promised her the world. Desperation drove her to bankruptcy. In 2009, Melissa Gilbert filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, publicly declaring debts of over $360,000. The filing became public record, splashed across tabloids and gossip sites. America's beloved Laura Ingalls was broken, and the subject of cruel mockery. The shame was annihilating. Every headline felt like another confirmation of what she had always feared. She wasn't enough. She had failed. She was worthless. Her marriage to Bruce disintegrated under the weight of financial stress, resentment, and her spiraling alcoholism. By 2011, they separated. The divorce was finalized in 2011, and once again, Melissa found herself alone, staring into an abyss that seemed to have no bottom. At 47 years old, she had 2 failed marriages, 2 sons watching their mother struggle, no career, no money, and an addiction that was consuming her from the inside out. She had lost everything that she thought defined her. The fame, the family, the financial security, all of it gone. Friends who witnessed this period described Melissa as a ghost, physically present but emotionally absent, going through the motions of living while dying inside. She would show up to her kids' events with a smile plastered on her face, but behind closed doors, she was unraveling. There were nights she drank until she blacked out, waking up hours later with no memory of what had happened, terrified of what she might have done, what her children might have seen. There were days she couldn't get out of bed, paralyzed by depression so heavy it felt like drowning on dry land. "I hit rock bottom so many times I lost count," she confessed. "Each time I thought, this is it. This is as low as I can go. And then I'd fall further." The turning point came not with a dramatic intervention or a sudden epiphany, but with a quiet, devastating moment of clarity. It was late 2011. Melissa was alone in her small rented apartment, the kind of place she never imagined living in after years in Hollywood mansions. She looked around at the empty bottles she had tried to hide, at the bills she couldn't pay, at the phone that rarely rang anymore. And for the first time in decades, she stopped performing. She stopped pretending. She stopped trying to be Laura Ingalls or America's sweetheart or the perfect wife or the flawless mother. She just sat with the truth. "I'm an alcoholic," she said out loud to the empty room. "I'm broken, and I can't do this anymore." It wasn't heroic. It wasn't inspiring. It was surrender. The complete, total, devastating surrender of a woman who had spent her entire life fighting to be chosen, to be loved, to be enough, and had finally, mercilessly, run out of fight. But sometimes, surrender is where survival begins. The little girl who had been adopted, abandoned, exploited, and emptied was finally ready to face the most terrifying truth of all. The only person who could save her was herself, and she had no idea if she had the strength left to try. The question wasn't whether she could rise again. The question was whether there was anything left of Melissa Gilbert to rise. Recovery, Melissa quickly discovered, was nothing like the movies. There was no dramatic montage, no inspiring music, no transformation that happened in a neat 90 minutes. Recovery was brutal, unglamorous, and required her to face every demon she had spent decades drowning in alcohol. In early 2012, Melissa entered treatment for alcoholism. Not a luxury rehab facility with ocean views and celebrity chefs, but a no-nonsense program that stripped away every excuse, every performance, every mask she had ever worn. For the first time since she was 9 years old, she couldn't act her way through. The withdrawal was physical agony. Shaking hands, nausea, insomnia so severe she thought she might lose her mind. But the emotional withdrawal was worse. Without alcohol to numb the pain, every wound she had buried came screaming to the surface. The abandonment by her biological parents, her father's death, the exploitation of her childhood, the financial betrayal, the failed marriages, the years of pretending. In group therapy sessions, she sat in circles with strangers and spoke truths she had never voiced. "My name is Melissa, and I'm an alcoholic." Each time she said it, it felt like swallowing broken glass. But each time, it also felt like freedom. The therapists didn't care that she was Laura Ingalls. They didn't want her to perform or please or be perfect. They wanted her to be honest. And honesty, for someone who had spent her entire life being whoever others needed her to be, was the hardest role she had ever attempted. "I had to learn who Melissa actually was," she reflected years later. Not Laura, not the child star, not the perfect wife or mother, just me. And I had no idea who that was. The journey of self-discovery was painful and often lonely. She had to confront the reality that she had used people the same way she had been used, seeking validation instead of genuine connection. She had to apologize to her sons, Dakota and Michael, for the times her addiction had made her emotionally unavailable, for the mother they deserved but didn't always get. "Those conversations with my boys nearly broke me," she admitted, "but they were necessary. I couldn't move forward without acknowledging the damage I had done." Slowly, day by excruciating day, Melissa began to rebuild. Not her career, not her public image, but herself. She attended AA meetings religiously. She found a therapist who helped her process the trauma of her childhood. She started journaling, writing down thoughts and feelings without worrying if they would make a good script. And somewhere in that process, she met Timothy Busfield. Timothy was an actor and director, best known for his role on 30-something. He had his own scars, his own failed marriages, his own battles. But he was kind, stable, and most importantly, he saw Melissa, not the icon, not the Prairie girl, but the complicated, flawed, recovering woman trying to piece her life back together. Their relationship developed slowly, carefully. Melissa was terrified of repeating old patterns, of using love as a band-aid for wounds that needed real healing. But Timothy was patient. He didn't try to fix her or save her. He just walked beside her. "Tim was the first person who loved me for who I actually was," Melissa said. "Not who I pretended to be, not who the world wanted me to be. Just me, messy and broken and trying." They married in 2013, a small, intimate ceremony with family and close friends. No tabloids, no magazine deals, just two people choosing each other, scars and all. For Melissa, it was a revelation. Love didn't have to be performance, it could be partnership. But even as her personal life stabilized, new challenges emerged. In 2015, Melissa began experiencing severe pain in her neck and back. Years of physical work on Little House, stunts performed without proper safety measures, decades of tension carried in her body. All of it was catching up to her. The diagnosis was grim. Multiple herniated discs in her neck and spine, nerve damage, degenerative issues that would only worsen without intervention. Surgery was necessary, not optional. In 2016, Melissa underwent her first spinal surgery. The procedure was complex, risky. There was a chance she could lose mobility, experience chronic pain, suffer complications. The irony was not lost on her. She had survived addiction, bankruptcy, and public humiliation, only to face her body breaking down. "I was terrified," she confessed, "but I also knew I had fought too hard to give up now." The surgery was successful, but recovery was brutal. Months of physical therapy, learning to move again without triggering pain, accepting that her body would never be what it once was. And just when she thought she was healing, more problems emerged. In 2019, she needed another surgery, then another. Each one chipping away at her physical strength, each one a reminder of mortality and fragility. There were days the pain was so intense she could barely get out of bed. Days when the old temptation to numb it all with alcohol whispered seductively. But she didn't drink. Not once. She went to meetings. She called her sponsor. She leaned on Timothy. She fought. "Every day I stay sober is a victory," she said. "Some days, that's all I can manage. And that has to be enough." Through the pain, something unexpected emerged. A new career, not as an actress, but as a writer and advocate. In 2009, just before her bankruptcy, Melissa had published her first memoir, Prairie Tale. The book was raw, honest, unflinching in its portrayal of her childhood exploitation and subsequent struggles. It resonated. Readers who had grown up watching her saw their own struggles reflected in her story. Former child stars reached out, grateful someone was finally telling the truth about the cost of early fame. Melissa discovered that her story, the real one, not the sanitized version, had power. She began speaking publicly about child actor rights, about the need for better financial protections, about the exploitation that continues in Hollywood. She testified before legislative bodies, pushing for laws that would protect children in entertainment from the abuse she had endured. "If my pain can protect even one child from what I went through," she said, "then maybe it wasn't all for nothing." She wrote more books, each one peeling back another layer of the carefully constructed myth of her childhood. She directed theater productions, finding joy in creating art without the pressure of being in front of the camera. She embraced aging, refusing cosmetic procedures, allowing her face to show the years. "These lines tell my story," she said, pointing to her face. "Every scar, every wrinkle, every gray hair is evidence that I survived. Why would I erase that?" By her mid-50s, Melissa had built something she never had before. A life that was authentically hers. Not famous in the way she once was, but respected. Not wealthy, but financially stable. Not perfect, but real. She still attended AA meetings weekly. She still saw her therapist. She still had days when the weight of her past felt crushing. But she also had Timothy, solid and steady. She had her sons, now adults, who had forgiven her and watched with pride as she rebuilt herself. She had purpose beyond performance. The transformation was not dramatic. It was gradual, painful, earned through thousands of small choices to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be present. The little girl who had spent her life trying to be chosen had finally learned to choose herself. And in that choice, she found something more valuable than fame ever gave her: peace. Today, in 2025, Melissa Gilbert stands at 60 years old. Not as the freckle-faced girl in braids who once captivated millions, but as a woman who has walked through fire and emerged, scarred but standing, transformed by every fall and every rise. She lives quietly now, away from the relentless glare of Hollywood. Her home is modest, filled not with awards and magazine covers, but with books, photographs of her grandchildren, and the simple comforts of a life built on authenticity rather than applause. Timothy is still beside her, a partnership that has weathered storms because it was built on truth, not performance. Her body still carries the marks of her battles. Chronic pain from multiple spinal surgeries is her daily companion. Some mornings, getting out of bed requires careful negotiation, with a spine that refuses to forget decades of stunts, stress, and survival. Reading glasses are constant now. The vision that once read scripts under stage lights has dimmed with age and wear. But when Melissa speaks about her life now, there is no bitterness, only clarity. "I spent 50 years trying to be someone I wasn't," she reflects. "The last 10, I've spent learning to be myself, and that's been harder and more rewarding than anything I ever did on camera." Her legacy extends far beyond Little House on the Prairie, though that show will forever be part of her story. Melissa has become one of the most vocal advocates for child actor rights, using her platform to push for legislation that protects young performers from the exploitation she endured. She has testified before Congress, demanding better financial safeguards for child actors. She has mentored young performers, warning them about the psychological cost of early fame and teaching them to protect their identities before Hollywood consumes them. She has written extensively about the dark side of child stardom, refusing to let the industry hide behind nostalgia and wholesome images. "If my story prevents even one child from being used the way I was," she says, "then every painful moment was worth it." Her advocacy has led to real change. California's Coogan law, designed to protect child actors' earnings, has been strengthened partly because of her testimony and activism. Other states have followed suit. The conversations about child exploitation in entertainment have shifted, and Melissa's voice has been central to that shift. But perhaps her most profound legacy is the simple, revolutionary act of survival. In an industry that chews up child stars and spits them out, leaving behind a trail of addiction, bankruptcy, and broken lives, Melissa Gilbert chose to live. She chose recovery when surrender would have been easier. She chose honesty when performance was all she knew. She chose to grow when staying broken would have required less courage. She still attends AA meetings. 15 years sober now, she knows the battle against addiction is never truly over. But she also knows she is stronger than the bottles that once owned her. Every day sober is a victory, a testament to the girl who was abandoned, exploited, and emptied, but refused to disappear. When asked what she wants people to remember about her life, Melissa doesn't mention Little House on the Prairie. She doesn't talk about fame or ratings or the millions who once knew her name. "I want people to know that you can be broken and still become whole again," she says quietly, "that your past doesn't have to define your future. that it's never too late to choose yourself, to fight for yourself, to become the person you were always meant to be. The little girl who was adopted, who became America's daughter, who lost herself in addiction and despair, has finally found the one thing that eluded her for 50 years. The freedom to simply be Melissa. Not Laura Ingalls, not a child star, not a cautionary tale or a comeback story. Just a woman who survived, who learned, who transformed pain into purpose, and who now stands as living proof that redemption is not a destination, but a daily choice. Her story reminds us that fame is fleeting, but courage endures. That the greatest role we will ever play is not on camera, but in the quiet moments when we choose to keep fighting, keep healing, keep becoming. And that legacy, built not on applause, but on authenticity, is the kind that never fades. Share your reflections below. Subscribe for more untold stories. And join us in honoring not just the icons, but the courageous, imperfect humanity within them. For in every scar, in every moment of surrender that became strength, Melissa Gilbert teaches us the ultimate truth. The bravest thing we can do is not to be perfect, but to be real.